What qualifies as covered residential real estate? Defining residential real estate. Under the rule. In Chapter 1, you learned why the federal government is increasing transparency and how the 2026 Real Estate Reporting Rule represents a cultural shift in Arizona real estate. Now we move from policy theory into transaction mechanics. The first critical question is simple but powerful. What type of property is actually covered? The FinCEN Real Estate Reporting Rule applies primarily to residential real estate, not large-scale commercial property. The rule is designed to address transparency concerns within the residential sector, particularly where entity ownership and non-bank financing intersect. Generally, covered property includes single-family homes, 1 to 4 unit residential dwellings, condominiums, townhomes, residential cooperatives, and vacant land intended for residential construction. If your practice centers around homes in Gilbert, Queen Creek, Chandler, Mesa, Scottsdale, or Phoenix, this rule is directly relevant to your transactions. The key principle is residential structure and intended use, not simply price. Arizona examples. What is covered? Consider the following scenarios common in Arizona practice. An LLC purchases a 3-bedroom single-family rental property in Phoenix with cash. This falls squarely within the residential scope and may be covered if other trigger elements exist. An out-of-state investor forms an Arizona LLC to purchase a Scottsdale condominium as a short-term rental using private financing. This also falls within scope. An entity purchases vacant residential zoned land in Maricopa County with the intent to build a single-family home. Because the property is intended for residential development, it may be covered. In each example, the property type meets the residential definition under the rule. What is generally not covered? The rule is not primarily aimed at large commercial property. Office buildings, industrial warehouses, retail shopping centers, and large multifamily complexes exceeding the 1 to 4 unit residential threshold are generally outside the core residential focus of this rule. Agricultural land not intended for residential development typically falls outside the scope as well. For example, if an LLC purchases a 40-unit apartment complex in Tucson with cash, that transaction likely falls outside the primary residential scope of this rule, although other federal or state regulations may still apply. However, smaller residential investment properties such as duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes remain within scope. Arizona agents working in 2 to 4 unit investment property markets must pay close attention. Vacant land, a common Arizona gray area. Arizona experiences significant vacant land investment, particularly in expanding areas such as Pinal County and the outskirts of Maricopa County. The rule generally covers vacant land intended for residential development. If an LLC purchases 2 acres zoned for residential subdivision with plans to build single-family homes, that transaction may trigger reporting if other elements are present. If the same LLC purchases agricultural land for farming operations with no residential intent, the property may fall outside scope. Zoning classification and intended use are critical. Brokers must understand how local land use impacts federal reporting triggers. Dollar amount does not control. Unlike earlier geographic targeting orders that applied only above specific price thresholds, the permanent nationwide rule may apply regardless of purchase price when other trigger elements exist. This means that a $250,000 rental property purchased in cash by an LLC may be covered. A $3.5 million luxury home purchased in cash by an LLC may also be covered. Arizona's mid-range investor market is just as relevant as high-end luxury transactions. The rule is transaction-based, not luxury-based. Why property type matters for brokers. Understanding property scope allows brokers and agents to identify potential reporting triggers early in the transaction process. This knowledge supports accurate buyer consultations, proactive communication with escrow and title, and reduced closing day confusion. Under AAC, R428-1103, Arizona-designated brokers are responsible for reasonable supervision of salespersons and associate brokers. Reasonable supervision includes educating agents about significant regulatory developments that impact transaction structure. A brokerage heavily involved in investor LLC purchases must ensure agents understand which property types fall within scope. Awareness of property classification is the first compliance filter. Connecting to Section 2.2. Property type alone does not trigger reporting. It must be paired with a covered legal entity and specific financing conditions. In Section 2.2, we will examine what qualifies as a covered legal entity under the rule and why ownership structure is the second half of the reporting equation. Residential property is the foundation. Entity ownership is the trigger mechanism.